Hello, my name is Rev Donna Maurer, and I'm the spiritual leader of the Sonoran Desert Center for Spiritual Living in Amado, Arizona. I'm here on YouTube today with our music director, Heather O'Day, and John Lopez, who is our practitioner of the day. We thank you for sharing your time with us, and Heather's going to ring the bells that open our service.
Hello, my name is Heather O'Day, and I'm the music director at the Sonoran Desert Center for Spiritual Living. Let's begin today's celebration with some bells.
Namaste. It's my pleasure to be with you today, and I'd like you to join me in our opening invocation. Know with me that there is only God everywhere and equally present, filling all space. It is divine love, unconditional allowing to be. It lives, moves, and has its being in, through, as, and is all creation, including you and me. We are divine, perfect expressions of spirit, and we are one with it. In this unity, I declare and affirm that this service is already a perfect divine idea in the mind of God, and it manifests and unfolds perfectly now through Heather's beautiful spirit-inspired music and the God-inspired words of Rev Donna. I declare this service whole, perfect, and complete now. With gratitude, I release my word into divine mind, and we anchor it by saying, and so it is. Namaste.
So, during the month of September, we've been doing a song called There Is Nowhere That God Is Not, also called There Is Nowhere That Love Is Not, or whatever word for God that resonates with you the best. And today is the day that we get to put the entire thing together, because we've been learning one verse at a time. And since it's the last week in September, then we get the entire song today. Here we go, let's do it. Sometimes I forget where I come from. Sometimes I forget where I'm going to. Sometimes I get so confused I lose my way. Sometimes I know you feel the same. There is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. Everywhere I am, I know what I got. Sometimes I believe in what I say. Sometimes I believe in what I perceive. Sometimes I get so confused I lose my way. Sometimes I know you feel the same. There is nowhere that love is not. is nowhere that love is not. There is nowhere that love is not. Everywhere I am, I know what I got. Now, here's a little bridge part. You don't have to sing it if you don't want to, but I'm still going to put the words up for you so you can. I forgot to pray, forgot to be still and know. I forgot to forgive myself until I forgave myself. I forgot to ask for help, forgot to say a word. I forgot to believe in me, believe in my spirit well. There is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. Everywhere I am, I know what I got. Everywhere I am, I know what I got. Everywhere I am, I know what I got.
Thank you, Heather. Our theme for the month has been finding our way. And we've looked at life, at love, and at gratitude as key components to finding our way. They are how we stay focused on that which is good, beautiful, and true. But sometimes, in our attempt to see the positive side of things, we ignore those things that are painful. And I think that when we do this, that we're cutting off a portion of something that would make us whole. So today, my topic is a little strange. It is grief finds a way. And grief is defined as our natural reaction to loss. And I just heard a comment from performer and author Sky Nelson. Grief allows us to cope with things that would otherwise crush us. I think most of us, when this pandemic first began, felt like once it was over, we could get back to normal, and then it might take a few months. Well, obviously that time has come and gone. And some predictions caution that we may never have a full, quote unquote, return to normal. And to me, I feel a loss in the letting go of what was, and an anxiety around the uncertainty of what will be. And there are other losses going on around us. I think most of us grieve as we watch the fires, the hurricanes, and the floods that are devastating our country. And I know many of us are heartbroken over how divisive our country has become, whether it's in the political arena or with our racial tensions. And I think if we're going to find our way through all of these things, we are going to have to acknowledge the uncertainty, the loss, and the grief we are experiencing. And for many of us, it is very real. It may show up in our emotions as lethargy, depression, anxiety. It may appear in our physical bodies as shallow breathing, tightening in our stomachs, a low-grade headache. Certainly, most of us are positive people and believe that it is important to consciously change our thinking so that we can cope with all that is happening around us in a spirit of peace. But we also must be careful of jumping too quickly into the solution before we have truly processed the problem. The rather new term for this is spiritual bypass. And that simply means that if we don't acknowledge what we are feeling, if we stuff our grief, our heartbreak, then it cannot be incorporated into our life story. and we will miss the healing that it can bring us. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, says, for years, classical psychology of all types erroneously thought that grief was a process that you did once, preferably over a year's period of time, and then it was done with. And anyone who was unable or unwilling to complete this over the prescribed time period had something rather wrong with them. But we know now what humans have known instinctively for centuries, that certain hurts and harms and shames can never be done being grieved. I was listening to a webinar by Nicholas Kalura, director of St. Raphaelis Retreat Center near Philadelphia, regarding grief and the pandemic. And he uses grief and loss interchangeably. He too says that our understanding of grief has changed. And today, contemporary grief therapists are moving toward a narrative approach to grief. He says we now understand loss as a disruption in our system of meaning, something in our story, and the meaning of our life story changes when we go through grief. And this is what we grapple with. What is our story? And how does this loss impact our story? When you and I suffer a direct loss, like the death of a loved one, the destruction of our home in a fire, hurricane, or earthquake, there is a definite place where it sticks on our story timeline. It becomes a major part of our story. But when we are encountering these existential losses, changes to our lifestyle because of the pandemic, heartbreak as we watch forests in flames, the loss of our own innocence in the face of racial violence, divisiveness so great in our political system that families no longer speak to each other, we may not even see these things as losses that are affecting us. But we do know that we feel uneasy, even though we've not identified that uneasy feeling as grief. So when these come up, I recommend meditating or journaling about them. And it helps to give them names. The uneasy feelings we may have are referred to by therapists as ambiguous grief. The traditional ways of coping with grief don't apply. We're not saying goodbye to a loved one. There are no traditional rituals that help us to restore to balance. But as we name this uneasiness ambiguous grief, we begin to be more aware of how change to our lifestyle is upsetting to our psyche. And we are mourning these changes, whether we're aware of it or not. You know, for one thing, we have altered our sense of presence and absence. You know, we've opened a whole new way of communicating in the world of Zoom, FaceTime, WhatsApp. But we have lost our ability to touch each other, to hug, to kiss, to mingle at a party. So in order for our story to be complete, we need to not only acknowledge what we can and are doing to cope with changes, but we need to grieve for what is no longer a part of our regular experiences. Anticipatory grief is another name and way we experience grief. Anticipatory grief is future-oriented. We are aware that we're going to experience loss. Perhaps it is something as simple as having to cancel a vacation because of the pandemic. But as we learn to identify this anticipatory grief, then we can consciously guide ourselves to move in to the present moment. And being in that present moment then gives us a sense of hopefulness regardless of the situation. Civic sadness, another name we can give our grief, is a sense of despair for the world or for society. And you and I can't help but be saddened by the many lives that have been lost or changed by the pandemic. We can't help but feel grief when our planet is racked with fires, floods, and hurricanes. We can't help feeling distressed over racial and political tensions. In fact, I think we should call this world grief, as these events touch almost every life on the earth. But by naming it civic or world grief, there comes a recognition that we are not alone. We are in this together. And when we realize that we're not alone, that others are having these moments of despair, we know that we can take a collective deep breath and begin once again to see the hope in and for the world. I remember when I lived in Los Angeles and fires charred the hills and valleys of the canyons. We cried for that lost beauty. But that following spring, wildflowers that had not been seen for 100 years carpeted the recently devastated landscape. There are many of us who are experiencing spiritual grief, as we've not been able to hold regular celebration services. We cannot meet in large groups. We can no longer touch and hug each other. We can't sing together. All the familiar rituals have been taken away. And while we've been able to record our services on YouTube, it's not like being in the same room with each other. And while we may not be able to do anything about it in the moment, I think it's important that we acknowledge our loss so that we validate the sorrow that we may be feeling. As we become aware of our grief, as we let it become a part of who we are, then we have a greater sense of self. When we allow ourselves to feel pain, we create a crack, the wound, the place where light can enter. I love that we are each a balancing act. The webinar I watched asked that we think about ourselves in terms of the pandemic. What have we lost? What have we gained? What in me has changed? What in me has not changed? And we might also ask ourselves, what has brought me joy? What has brought me pain? And where have I grown through all of this? We might not have the answers right away, but I have a feeling that if we ask these questions from a deep place within us, something will provide us with the answers. Because there is that within us that is our true source. And by acknowledging the authenticity of our feelings, our sorrow, our grief, as well as our joy, that source is able to work more freely through us. Our heart is broken open, and we are receptive to the intuitive guidance of spirit. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, tells us we came from life and are in life, so we are one with life, and we know that instinctive life within, which has brought us to the point of self-recognition, still knows in us the reason for all things, the purpose underlying all things. And we know that there is nothing in us of fear, doubt, or confusion which can hinder the flow of reality to the point of our recognition. We are guided daily by divine intelligence into paths of peace, wherein the soul recognizes its source and meets it in joyful union, in complete at-one-ment. So grief is a process that brings us to this place of peace. And if we allow ourselves to feel it, to work with it, to understand it, to name it, then we can look forward to the gifts that it brings. The gift of acceptance, accepting the things we cannot change and making peace with them. Accepting that life has changed and we are able to incorporate that change into our story. The gift of appreciation, appreciation for the small blessings and the big ones. And with this appreciation, to be able to treasure each moment as it comes. The gift of self-understanding, seeing ourselves as multidimensional beings, that we cannot be whole without embracing both our joys and our sorrows. Buddhist monk Jack Kornfield says, "It's not easy. This human realm in which we have taken birth is halfway between heaven and earth, and it is said to have fundamentally an equal measure of suffering and pleasure, of joy and pain, of loss and gain, of the mundane and the daily, punctuated by unspeakable beauty and oceans of tears. We have the gift of knowing what is important and what is not. You know, my little giggle is that for all the time and money I've spent in coloring my hair, I find that now I actually like the silver streaks. But there are even bigger things, like what am I doing, thinking, being, that no longer serve me, and how can I gently release those things? The gift of gratitude. As we see death tolls from this pandemic rising, we must give thanks for every day that we're on this planet, for every breath we take, for every person who has touched our lives, and of course, for finding every tiny place in which and for which we can be grateful. I've often quoted portions of Khalil Gibran's chapter on joy and sorrow in The Prophet. But today I want to close by reading the whole thing. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. And the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say, joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. So as we end this month of finding our way, let's incorporate grief as a way to find ourselves and to open our hearts. Thank you. Namaste.
As above, so below, as within, so without. We are one, we are whole. Peace be to you, for you are safe. As above, so below, as within, so without. We are one, we are whole. Peace be to you, for you are safe. In the arms of love, we will find our strength. In the arms of love, we will find our care. so below as within, so without. We are one, we are whole. Peace be to you, for you are saved. In the arms of love, we will find our strength. In the arms of love, we will find our care and our grace. As above, so below, as within, so without. We are one, we are whole. Peace be to you, for you are saved. Peace be to me, for I am saved. Peace be to us, for we are saved.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for joining us today. We have a wonderful announcement. We will be meeting in person beginning next Sunday, October 4, at 10:30 a.m. And we will hold services at the Oasis, which is the outdoor patio area next to the Amado Inn during the month of October. We will be videoing our Sunday services so that they'll still be available to those who are watching from afar or those who choose to continue to stay at home. We thank you all for being with us today. And now I turn our celebration service over to John for our closing affirmative prayer.
And so let's know together that there is only God, everywhere present, filling all space. And that this includes all there is. This includes happiness and joy, and it also includes grief. Because wherever grief is, it is an expression, an outpicturing of spirit, as we need to release sorrow and emotion. But God is always there. God is all there is, within, without, above and below. And so I know and declare that it is good grief, as Charlie Brown used to say, and that it is cleansing, it purifies, and it releases. So anywhere where there might be sorrow or sadness, we allow the grief to fully express in all of its goodness, because there God is. And wherever in the world that there may be grief or sorrow, I know that the good is there right along with it. The good is at the back of it, and the good prevails and is everywhere present at all times. all is well, because God is here and now, expressing, working in, through, and as everyone right here and right now. Being so grateful for this word, knowing that it is law in the universe. I release it now into universal mind for immediate manifestation for the highest and best good of all concerned. Namaste.